Hey and welcome back to Fanfic Reading. Today we are reading The Warmth That Changed It All by Raalm and ToxicExotic. I hope you enjoy.
Chapter 70, Auburn Fletch. Slowly lifting herself from the bed, Weiss looked behind her to the spot where Yang had been laying only moments ago. It felt weird. Usually she could rely on waking up to Yang beside her, or being woken up by teasing kisses from the blonde. In fact, there had only been a few times where that hadn't happened. Normally that was because they slept in a little, and the girl had to do her morning workout, but that morning was different. Instead of moving to a free space, Yang had simply walked to the bathroom and turned the tap on. It was yet more proof of how much Weiss had upset her girlfriend. She still couldn't forget the anger she had seen in Yang's eyes the night before. How the girl had practically shouted at her and left, only to return hours later and given her an ultimatum. The truth or they're done. Weiss knew the fact that situation had even come about was entirely her own doing. It had been her who had leaked the document that had caused Ruby to lose her chance at Beacon, and it had been her who kept that truth from Yang when she knew she shouldn't have. And just as her actions had hurt Atlas, so too had they hurt her relationship. However, she could at least fix one of them. So with a small sigh at her own stupidity, she stretched her arms and walked towards the bathroom. Arriving at the door frame, she saw her girlfriend standing in front of the mirror wearing a sports bra and a pair of tracksuit bottoms brushing her teeth. Though the lilac eyes flicked to her for a second, she said nothing. Walking up, she placed her arms around Yang's waist and thanked whatever gods there may or may not be that the woman didn't pull away. She didn't smell of anything in particular. Even the usual hint of sweat was absent due to the cold night of Argus, but the warmth of her bare skin was still so incredibly young that Weiss felt herself melt further into it. "Are you still mad at me?" she asked quietly. Yang didn't reply instantly, instead continued brushing her teeth. Not wanting to rush her, Weiss simply tightened her arms around the woman's waist and waited. Finally, after almost a minute, the blonde leaned forward to spit out her toothpaste and let out a small sigh. "No!" She reached over to the mouthwash. "I'm sorry I shouted, but I meant what I said last night. I can't do secrets, Weiss. Not between us." Not lessening her hold on the ball of sunshine in her arms, Weiss gave a nod. Yang was right. She definitely shouldn't be having to deal with secrets. "I know," she muttered sadly. "I'll be better." Waiting quietly as the girl finished her morning routine. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Yang breathed after rinsing her mouth out. "Did you really think I'd be mad at you?" "I was going to," Weiss replied honestly, finally moving away and to stand beside the woman. "But you were upset about Blake, and I know how much Ruby means to you." She gave a small shrug and looked down. "I just wanted to enjoy our holiday." "I get that, Weiss." Yang groaned as she turned around and folded her arms while leaning back against the counter. "But you know how tough the past few months have been for me. My dad, my mom, Raven, Blake, constant arguing because of secrets that they kept from me. I don't want that for us." "You're right." Weiss nodded, knowing exactly how Yang felt having been there for all of it. "I'm sorry I made you feel that way too." "I know you are." Yang smiled weakly, though it was clearly sincere. "Just please don't do it again." Weiss looked up, her blue eyes meeting Yang's lilac and holding firm. "I won't. I meant what I said last night too. I don't want to lose you." Yang held the gaze for a couple of seconds, but quickly gave a nod followed by a stronger smile than before. Dropping her arms, Weiss felt the blonde's hand slip into hers and give a small squeeze. It was a small gesture, but it at least told Weiss that things were going to be okay. So, returning it, Weiss leaned in and rested her head on Yang's shoulder. "So you forgive me?" "Of course," Yang replied softly as an arm slipped around her shoulder. Enjoying the embrace for a couple of minutes, Weiss closed her eyes and thought about how lucky she was that Yang was so forgiving. But she also knew that she shouldn't have been lucky, and was definitely going to make sure she didn't have to be again. But first, she had to be totally honest. "Good," she said cautiously and pulled away, reaching over to turn the shower on to warm it up. "Because I have a request?" The woman folded against her chest again as Weiss prepared to get ready for her shower. "About Beacon?" "MHM," she hummed and turned to face the boxer. "I want to talk to Ruby myself." Yang's eyes immediately fell into a suspicious scowl. "Why?" "Well," Weiss pulled her nightgown off and gave a small shrug. I want to offer to pay for H dash. Weiss dash. I know what you're going to say. Weiss cut Yang off before she could interrupt entirely. I know you don't want me to spend that kind of money, and I understand why, but this is my mistake. It's my fault she won't be able to go, and I want to at least give her the chance. And I want Ruby to be the one to decide. I don't like you paying for that stuff. I know you don't, Weiss replied, stepping forward and putting her arms around her girlfriend's waist. But think of it this way. The scholarship money was technically my family's money anyway, so all I'm really doing is giving her the money she would have been getting, just more directly. Though Yang's scowl didn't fade, she didn't immediately reject the argument, which Weiss considered to be a good sign. Gently running her thumb along the firm muscles of the woman's back, she waited for Yang to make a decision. It certainly wouldn't surprise her if Yang decided against it, and she would respect her wishes if that was the case, but she was really hoping that she would at least allow her the opportunity to try. Fine, she breathed and shook her head. But if she says no, you accept it and move on. Okay? Weiss gave an immediate nod, finding the terms more than acceptable. Absolutely. Then go ahead, Yang said with a defeated tone. Though she's been trying to keep all of this a secret from me for years, so she can do it on her own, so don't be surprised if she says no to you as well. If she says no, then so be it. Weiss smiled up at Yang. I just want to try at least. I really didn't expect you to even let me do that. For the first time in 24 hours, Yang let out a chuckle. The mere sound of it was enough for Weiss to feel her spirits lift, and she was more than happy to lean in and rest her head against the muscular woman's chest to enjoy the feeling of it rumbling through her. Well, I should probably be taking my own advice and start letting Ruby make her own decisions. Pulling back, I raise an eyebrow. Sorry, different conversation. Though she hadn't talked about it, not that she had really talked about anything, Weiss was very aware that some conversation had taken place between Yang and Winter last night. What that was, though, she had no idea. Thankfully, though, since Yang was thinking back on it fondly, and she wasn't in a cell, Weiss felt safe assuming they had at least found some common ground. I won't ask. She smiled and leaned back in. What had happened between Winter and Yang, it was between them. I really do need a shower, though. I'm meeting with Fletch in 6 hours. Then I should leave. Ooh. Weiss let her hand slip from Yang's waist to her perfectly toned rear. You could join me? Not today, Yang replied softly, her hands coming down to pull Weiss away. I still need to do some workouts. While Weiss gave a nod, she was a little happy her girlfriend couldn't see that her face had dropped a little. Normally, Yang would never refuse that offer. All right, she said, forcing the smile back on her face as she looked up. Well, I'll only be a little while then. Thankfully, despite the rejection, Yang leaned down and placed a short kiss on her lips. It wasn't much, rather chaste compared to their usual exchanges, but it was at least enough for Weiss to know they would eventually move past it. As quickly as it began, though, Yang pulled away and gave her a smile before leaving the room. Left alone, Weiss let out a short sigh at how much she had screwed up and quickly began her own morning routine. They could have at least used a better picture of me, Yang grumbled, picking up the magazine from the stand. Looking over Yang's shoulder, Weiss saw that the cover was plastered with a shot of herself and Yang standing behind the barrier talking to the detectives. To the side of it was another picture of Yang alone with a look of worry on her face with the caption, "Who is she?" below. Neither of them were surprised to see it, of course. Even without the warning from Winter that had been waiting when she exited the shower, Weiss had already figured the paparazzi wouldn't have missed Yang being let past the guards. So, as the blonde turned to the indicated page, Weiss was not surprised in the least that a majority of the page had been dedicated to pictures of Yang instead of the fake threat. After all, one was regular, while the other was uncommon. In the early hours of Saturday afternoon dash. Hey! The middle-aged man behind the counter growled and cut her off. This ain't a library, kid. Some of us need to make a living here. Weiss saw his eyes flick to her and let out a sigh. Passing her coffee to Yang and pulling out her purse, she threw a lean card down on the counter. Without even waiting for the change, she walked away with Yang next to her. Afternoon, Mistral police were called to the Asagal Hotel after a bomb threat was sent against Weiss Schnee. Yang read in an uneasy voice. After a thorough search, the police were able to discern that it was indeed fake. To our readers, though, that will hardly come as a surprise. I'm sure you all remember the similar incident that occurred last year in Atlas, and the year before that. Weiss definitely did. She remembered them all, especially the first, which had happened when she was 6. However, the real interesting part of the night happened nearly 30 minutes after the hotel was cleared when an unknown blonde woman around Miss Schnee's age, "Oh, that's me," Yang cooed, making Weiss shake her head in amusement, approached the cordoned-off area and was quickly allowed through by the heiress herself. Unfortunately, whoever this blonde was, our reporters are unable to say. I really do like how they still refer to themselves as reporters, Weiss sneered, earning a harsh laugh from her girlfriend. It takes a special talent to be that unaware. What we can report, though, is that the very same blonde was escorted to a safe house minutes later, and was later seen exiting the Argus Express with Miss Schnee and exploring the city of Argus only a day later, as well as with Miss Schnee's elder sister, Winter Schnee, later that night, indicating that the two are quite close. While we don't have an identity yet, we want our readers to rest assured that we will be keeping them informed with anything we uncover. Finished? Weiss asked with a smile as Yang turned the magazine sideways. They really do suck at taking pictures, Yang hummed while inspecting a blurry picture of herself. How are they going to make me look like some golden yeti in my first appearance? Because they have no talent and make their money off of gossip, Weiss replied as she reached over and plucked the magazine from her hand, careful not to graze the bruised and cut knuckles. Not even bothering to give it a second glance, she dumped it into a trash can, which she still considered too good a place for it. However, as amusing as it was to see Yang mocking the article, it did present a rather real problem. Now that Yang had been seen and questions were being asked, they were quickly running out of time to make sure Jacques found out from them personally. Let's just hope Jacques doesn't see this before we can tell him, she breathed, causing fog to momentarily obscure her vision. It's going to be tough enough already. Well, at least he'll have a harder time suppressing it than he did with Winter. I suppose that is true, Weiss agreed, though still problematic. If Winter is right, then he is almost finished with business in Atlas. But that publication prints in Vale too, so he will be aware of it within days of him returning. He won't find out before then, Yang asked cautiously. They have an online site. Hopefully not, Weiss replied weakly, knowing it definitely was a possibility. That all depends on how busy he is, and how tightly the military are controlling the flow of information. Right. It was obvious that there was something Yang wanted to say. What are your thoughts on that anyway? Sounds like things are really bad in Atlas. Weiss didn't reply immediately, simply held her drink close to ward off the cold and took a sip. That had definitely been something on her mind since leaving the military base. For as long as she had lived in Vale, Atlas was still her home. It was where she had been born, where her grandparents had lived and raised her mother. Of course, it had its issues, but it was still her mother tongue and a place she had fond memories of. So to hear that it had fallen into such chaos saddened her, even more so since she knew she had played a part. I don't know, she said honestly. With everything Atlas has done, the Mantle and Faunus protests have been a long time coming, and very deserved. But with the White Fan renewing their attacks and muddying everything, I fear their valid complaints might fall on unwilling ears. I know they did with me before the attack, and I know it happened with the Council too. Well, I hope they don't this time. It's about time Mantle started getting the same rights as Atlas. I agree, Weiss hummed in response. Hopefully Fiona Time will actually succeed in getting the council seat she was running for. With all this chaos going on, I'm sure the people will be rallying behind her more than ever. She's the Lamphaunus, right? MHM. She's related to the Marigolds, but her father was ousted from the family by his parents after having her. Spent her life in Mantle, but she's still close with some of the Marigolds that were against it. Pretty much gives her a perspective on both sides of the kingdom. Sounds like someone who cares more than the people who are on the council now, Yang mumbled. I wouldn't exactly say that. Yang glanced sideways at her, and she was quick to explain herself. I do believe all the council members actually care about Atlas as a whole, just in different ways. Speaking from experience, it's a lot harder to make changes than people think, especially when there are others trying to make their own. But I guess you are right that someone whose interests are more aligned with Mantle would be a good change. Anything that could help turn it around would be good, honestly, Yang sighed. And then when you take over the STC, things will only get better. MHM. It was all Weiss could give as a reply. In truth, she'd been having doubts about that ever since seeing that state of the Mistral offices. Doubts that she could even fix the STC if she were to oust her father, and though she was pushing those doubts to the side, they kept creeping back in. Hopefully Fletch will help me get a little closer to that goal today. You think he'll accept your offer? Weiss shrugged, taking another sip of her coffee and feeling its warmth run through her body. Fletch had brought up his desire to maybe restart a business plenty of times during their conversations in the last few months. Sometimes it would just be a passing mention, others he would talk for at least an hour about the invention that had made him known, a whole new wing design that was still used in Mistral's airships. He rarely made mention of the failures that caused his business to collapse though. Weiss knew them of course, but she chose to never discuss them either. However, whenever he had talked about his past work, there had always been a sense of fondness to his emails. A pride that made it clear he missed it, something she could certainly understand. To go from having a business that was renowned around the kingdom for working on life-changing technology, to bankrupt with nothing to do would surely be something that played havoc on someone's confidence. It had definitely done a number on Auburn, since he had never tried again despite being rich. If I can persuade him to take a chance again, then sure, she said hopefully. I don't think it will be too hard to convince him to try again, but he'll probably put up some resistance. I'm sure you'll get him to do what you want, Yang said with a smile. You usually do. Though Weiss would disagree with that statement after growing up as she had, she accepted the compliment. After all, the fact that Yang was actually talking to her and seemed to be happy was something she definitely wasn't going to put a stop to anytime soon. I'll certainly do my best, she smiled back at the radiant blonde. While she wasn't able to show much in the way of open affection, she moved a little closer and allowed their hands to graze together for a second. It really was barely anything, but the contact felt wonderful, and even Yang cast her a knowing glance. More than happy with that, she lowered her head to drink her coffee again as they rounded a corner to a movie theater. The restaurant that Weiss stepped into was decadent, the walls lavishly decorated in white and gold with pictures of beautiful vistas from all over Mistral. Magnificent mahogany tables and chairs filled with people sat surrounded by numerous archways and alcoves that held up a second-floor balcony, from which hung lush green vines and plants. Dotted around them drooping ever so slightly were small blue bulbs, which she knew to be honeysuckle, which the place was famous for growing itself to use in dishes that filled the area with a deliciously sweet smell. In fact, the restaurant itself was famous all over the world for its unique approach to dining. It was such a stark difference to the usual restaurants she attended for business meetings that had always felt so impersonal and stifling, where tables were all clumped together in a large open space so that conversation could easily be overheard. Instead, the family that had passed down the ambrosia for generations had done so with only one goal in mind: to make people feel at home. As such, the entire place had been set up to resemble as close to a villa as it could get. Though there were a few tables and a small open area just behind the hostess table, Weiss knew there were tables hidden away in their own comfortable alcoves, offering privacy and a sense of intimacy between whoever chose to dine there. The building was also located on the top of a cliff that overlooked Argus, so each alcove contained a large window that offered a magnificent view of either the ocean, the city, or the forest that lay beyond. It was all of those things combined that made it Weiss' favorite restaurant in the world, and one she visited whenever she was in Argus. Good afternoon, Urania. Weiss smiled politely as she approached the hostess, a dark-skinned woman in her early 20s, with a pretty face and shining platinum hair, who had definitely not been one of her earliest crushes. How have you been? Very well, Miss Schnee, the woman replied in a happy, melodic voice. Yourself? Busy, she chuckled. I'm sure you know the feeling, though? The woman gave a short chuckle that almost sounded like a tinkling of chimes as her green eyes lit up. My mother definitely keeps us on our toes, but she also kept your favorite table open all day. She's so kind. Weiss nodded appreciatively. I don't suppose my guest has arrived yet. Mr. Fletch? Weiss gave a nod. Yes, he arrived 5 minutes ago, in fact. I'll show you through. Thank you. It didn't take long to be led to her usual room. Following the woman up the stairs, she looked over the balcony to see the youngest child of the family playing a slow and gentle jazz tune for the diners. She knew him too, of course. Flint Cole, Urania's brother, who had made a name for himself with his music, but still chose to play at his family's restaurant. Your host, Mr. Fletch? Weiss turned around at those words, and saw Urania holding open a curtain to a room. Just inside was yet another mahogany table. Though it was big enough for 6 people, it was set for 2. The room itself was lit gently with a chandelier that rested overhead, and the window on the far side looked out over the ocean. In the distance, she could just make out the sandy shore of a small island that sat between Anima and Solitas. However, sitting much closer was Auburn Fletch. Despite only pushing 50, the man still looked to be older. In pictures of the man's younger days, he had always kept his hair combed back to give off a windswept impression, and while that was still the case, it was noticeably messier. The dark brown hair was now gray with strands sticking out at odd angles. Worry had etched deep lines into his once smooth face, and there was small stubble along his jaw. However, despite his tired-looking face, the rest of him showed that he was still a man in his prime. His attire itself was impeccably maintained, his dark navy, button-up jacket, and patched kilt both clean and crisp. His long socks were tied against his legs with no holes, and his black shoes were shined so much that Weiss bet she could have seen her reflection should she lean down to check. He had also not let himself go as evidenced by his button-up jacket, which was fit so tightly to his muscular body that sleeves looked like they were ready to rip open at the slightest flex. Most noticeably thought were his eyes, as silver as rubies and full of life. Each shining orb held a sharpness that sent a shiver down her back. Despite his company failing, the man was someone who had made great changes and had understood what it took to start a business, and it was clear that intelligence had not faded. "Auburn," she said with a genuine smile as she walked through the curtain. "It's so nice to finally meet you." "Same," he grunted, his voice slightly accented. "More of a wee little lass than the pictures make you out to be, eh? I would recommend you don't judge me by my size," Weiss replied humorously with a raised eyebrow as she held out her hand. "Wouldn't dream of it," he said with the faintest of smirks, taking the offered limb and shaking it. "My old man always said that business is all in the mind. Besides, your emails show how bright you are already." "Thank you," Weiss replied and released his hand to sit down at the table. "Would you like your usual Miss Schnee?" Urania said politely from the doorway. Weiss gave her a small nod. "Perfect. It shouldn't be too long." The woman left, the curtain swinging shut behind her. Though they could still hear Flint's gentle music drifting up to them, the building was designed in such a way that they couldn't hear either of the rooms beside them. "So I hear you just finished up with some business in Mistral?" "I did." Weiss smiled and shrugged off her jacket. "Though it was definitely more of an ordeal than I thought it would be." "Let me guess. Lakis? Her reputation precedes her, I take it?" "Lass has always been a swindler. Not a day passes where she doesn't try to get more than she needs." "That is a surprising apt description." Weiss chuckled as she remembered just how much of a chore it had been to even get accurate numbers from the woman. "She eventually relented, though." I never said she was a good swindler, did I?" He grinned. "It would take the best of swindlers to stop me getting what I desire." I'm sure," he said with a nod, pouring himself some wine and offering some to her. She accepted and held out her glass. "And what is it you desire today?" Glancing upwards as her glass slowly filled with white wine, she saw that his silver eyes flashed with understanding. Not wanting to lie to the man, not only because of her recent troubles with it, but also because she had told Yang she would be upfront about her intentions, she let a smile fall across her face. Giving him a nod when the glass was a quarter full, she raised it to her lips and took a small sip, the sharp sting of alcohol searing her throat for a second. "Surely it would be better to discuss that with more satiated stomachs?" she replied hopefully, letting her voice take on a little of her usual business tone. "I much prefer to discuss business before," he said patiently. "That way I can focus on a good meal with good company." "Very well," Weiss hummed, taking another sip and putting the glass down. "Your patent." "How predictable." He breathed and leaned back. Though he didn't seem upset, his brow did furrow a little. "What of it?" "I'm curious about why you refuse to sell it," she said, crossing her hand on the table and leaning in to show she was listening. "Or even license it." "Well, that's simple, lass." He folded his arms. "I don't trust companies." "You mistrust even my word?" "Miss Schnee dash." "Weiss," she offered. "Weiss," he accepted with a nod of his head. "With all due respect, you are the daughter of Jacques Schnee and the heiress to a foul company obsessed with profit and willing to do anything to make it. While I have enjoyed our talks, and you certainly seem brighter than your pea-brained old man, Your company is one of the ones I never intend to work with." Looking in the man's eyes, she saw sincerity there. She knew the man hated companies and always been rather short with them and their attempts to get a hold of his patent, but she hadn't expected that hatred to be so passionate. However, as much as it irked her to be compared to him, she could hardly deny the rest of it. The STC was obsessed with profit, as were almost every other company, and their method of making it were questionable at best. Cutting corners on products, bribing council workers, unfair health insurance, and exhaustive hours. Her father and the other shareholders had done a number of the once revered company. "And for that, I do not blame you," she sighed, sitting back in her chair and picking back up the wine, but quickly putting it back down as she caught her reflection. "The STC is no longer the company it once was, and Jacques only makes it worse day by day." For a few seconds he looked at her quizzically. She knew it was because of how she had just spoken of not only her company, but also her father, but she didn't flinch. Her words were true, and despite Jacques' best efforts, a lot of other people did too. And she was done pretending that wasn't the case. "That is why I am not here trying to secure your patent for the STC. It is why I have not been reaching out to you as a representative of the STC for some time now. I have no intention of letting it anywhere near your patent." "Well, it's nice to hear you do have a good head on your shoulder after all." He nodded and took a large gulp of his own wine. "But I still ain't selling to you." "And I'm not buying," Weiss replied coolly. "Then why ask about it?" "I said I didn't want to buy it, not that I wasn't interested in it," she said honestly. "After all, your patent is incredible. A design for international travel using solar energy with almost no impact on the environment. It would be foolish for me not to be interested in that. You are literally sitting on a patent that could change the world. Except it won't if I give it to them. My design is not only intended to reduce carbon emissions, but also to make travel affordable. I have zero confidence that the STC, Merlot Industries, or any of the conglomerates will respect that." "So what if you don't give it to any of them?" Weiss said cautiously, leaning forward again as she entwined her fingers. "What if you continue your work yourself?" His eyes narrowed slightly as he surveyed her. Before he could finish shaking his head, she continued, "After all, who better to get a project off the ground than the man who envisioned it?" "I've already tried that." He ignored her. "It drove my business into the ground and ruined my marriage." "I have read the history of your company," Weiss admitted. "I even wrote a paper on it." "Then you will know that if I could not do it then, I can't do it now." "That is not the impression I got from my research," Weiss reasoned. "From my knowledge, it was mostly your revenue stream that caused you to make the wrong decision and led your business to failure. A revenue stream I chose to follow because I blew all my money on research that ended up being nothing but a hope. In all your research about my patent, surely you must have learned that it was merely a concept," he said bitterly, though she suspected that was not directed at her. "An idea, a promising one, but still just that. I have no idea if it will even work or how much it would take to get it to work. I couldn't afford it then, let alone now." "You couldn't," Weiss hummed and sat back. "But I can." If Fletch's eyes had narrowed before, it was nothing compared to how he looked at her when she finished her proclamation. Had she not been trying her best to keep her composure, Weiss surely would have laughed at how close his eyelids had been pushed together by the squint. It didn't surprise her, though. She had after all basically just offered to personally fund a project that was nowhere near completion yet still worth hundreds of millions of lean. And potentially even billions if the project design ended up being successful. So, as weird as it would seem to most, the fact that he was treating her with no small amount of skepticism was actually reassuring. It showed that he was taking her, and the subject, seriously. "You do not have that much money." "I'm the richest woman in the world under 30. Weiss countered easily. "When my sister sold her shares, she gave me a significant portion of that money. I promise you that I have more than enough to get your research started. Not to mention that when word spreads that you are working with the granddaughter of Nicholas Schnee, I'm sure you will find more investors. He has a great many friends and admirers after all." "And you would do all of this why?" Weiss took a deep breath. She really didn't have to think too hard since she already knew the answer, but she did want to at least appear to be giving some extra consideration to her answer. "Because I want to change the world," she replied after a couple of seconds. "My grandfather is my hero. He set out with nothing and forged a company that made life better for everyone. That is what I want to do, and you and your patent allow me to do that in my own way, separate from the STC." A small smile settled over her face as his eyes began to return to normal. Knowing she had his attention, she prepared for what she knew would be a tough deliberation. So, here is my offer. It had been a very awkward day. Despite promising herself that she would forgive Weiss, Yang had woken up still a little annoyed. Enough so that the second morning of their 3-day stay in Argus had been a complete and utter waste. Even as they had wandered the beautiful city later that morning and caught a film at the theater before she went to meet Fletch, she could tell things weren't quite right between them yet. It was annoying that the only 3 days in which Weiss wasn't working just so happened to have included a falling out, but she was determined to fix that. So, as the door clicked closed, Yang sat up from her laid position on the bed and looked towards the entryway to see her girlfriend peeling off her heels. She looked tired, not a surprise since Yang was well aware that the heiress didn't sleep too well the previous night, but there was definitely an air of happiness about her. "Everything go well?" she asked as Weiss let out a small sigh of relief when the second heel was gone. "MHM," Weiss said with a nod. "He said he will give me an answer soon, but I know he was definitely interested, so I think it's in the bag." "And you told him you intended to partner with the STC?" "No," Weiss replied to Yang's surprise. "I may have changed my mind and decided that the business would be mine and kept separate. So I gave Auburn the change to invest in my startup for a percentage of the company, with a promise to help fund his research." "Won't that affect the pull you have over your dad?" she asked as Weiss pulled a big, yellow book from out of sight and made her way to a table in the corner of the room. "It will, but I want to keep him as far away from it as I can honestly. This is a good thing, and he would only ruin it." "That's fair." Yang breathed and shuffled on the bed to make room for Weiss. However, unfortunately for her, Weiss was already making to sit at the table. It was another sign that they were still not back to 100% since the woman would usually take any opportunity to be close. And wanting that normalcy to return, Yang sat up a little more. "Hey," she said softly. The heiress' head turned curiously, and Yang indicated towards the empty space beside her. Indecision filled Weiss' eyes for a second, and Yang suddenly realized that her girlfriend was trying to give her some space. "Come join me," she asked hopefully. Thankfully it seemed to clear up the indecision, and Weiss's face stretched into a smile as she picked up the book and walked over. The moment she was on the bed, Yang laid back and held out her arm, feeling a rush of happiness as Weiss immediately leaned into it and came to rest against her side. Neither of them spoke a word, but Yang happily watched as the Elysian pulled open what seemed to be a phone book and began to absent-mindedly flip through it. After a couple of seconds of watching Weiss try to read an advertisement for a washing machine, she finally reached out and put her hand over her girlfriend's. "I'm sorry," she breathed quietly as Weiss' head turned up to face her. "I shouldn't have gotten so angry." "It's fine," Weiss mumbled with a weak smile. "It's not like I didn't deserve it, I should have been honest. Still, I didn't ever want you to see that side of me." Weiss didn't respond with words. Instead, she reached up with her free hand and pulled their heads together. Enjoying the comforting feeling of Weiss' lips on hers for a few seconds, tasting what she believed to be honey and wine, she finally felt some of the awkwardness slip away. Eventually, though, they parted and Yang found herself staring down at her beaming girlfriend. "I fully intend to spend the rest of my life with you, Yang Xiaolong," she whispered gently as fingers wound themselves lightly into Yang's hair. "I was going to see it eventually. I guess. Wish it had been aimed at someone other than your sister, though." Weiss' smile dropped a little. "Did you two at least make up?" "We came to an understanding." "Good." Weiss nodded. "I'll ask no more." Appreciating it since she doubted Weiss would approve of the threat that had been issued, Yang let the woman's gaze back to the book that was now resting on her stomach. Removing her hand, she let her girlfriend continue searching for whatever she was looking for while pulling out her scroll. "I'm ordering food. You want something?" A slice of vanilla cheesecake. And a coffee. Please." "Mistral Mountains Roastery, and 10 Mortons it is then. Weird as fuck combo, but your sister got me onto that bloody gravy and fries thing she gave me." A surge of happiness pulsed through her as she felt Weiss chuckle against her chest. Briefly looking down before continuing her order, she saw a wide smile stretched over Weiss' face and felt comfort in the fact she knew it meant they would be okay. Chapter 71, 27476145 MMM. Yang hummed happily as she broke the kiss with her girlfriend. Despite having woken up an hour ago, the two of them had yet to actually leave the bed for anything except to open the door for room service, though the same was true for the night before too. After having finally talked about everything, the two had spent the night under the covers watching the television and eating food while Weiss continued to rummage through the phone book. Eventually though, Yang had fallen asleep, and for the first time in 2 days, it had been a restful one. "Alright, I really need to shower," Weiss chuckled, the slight smell of pancakes from the breakfast they'd just finished greeting Yang's nose, as the woman looked down at a brown stain on the collar of her shirt. "I can't believe you threw chocolate sauce at me. You weren't complaining when I licked it up." She grinned mischievously and slipped an arm around Weiss' waist. "Besides, you don't have to shower. It's not like you have any meetings today. I actually have one meaty dash." Yang couldn't stop the low groan that escaped her throat at that news. Letting Weiss go, she rolled onto her back and looked sideways at the snow angel. "ING, but it's personal, and you can come too if you want." Are you asking me on a mini-date? We can make it one afterwards if you like. How could I refuse?" Weiss flashed her a smile as she began to exit the bed, Yang quickly twisting around to watch. How could she not? After all, Weiss had begun to steal her shirts quite regularly to wear while sleeping, and that meant Yang was greeted to some pretty amazing sights. From the graceful neck and shallow cleavage as the girl laid down, to the luscious legs she was allowed to stare at while her girlfriend walked around, she was definitely not going to complain. Especially not when she was gifted a glance of Weiss' magnificent ass as she exited the bed. Before the woman could even take a few steps, Yang had pushed herself to sit on the edge of the bed and reached out to grab her hand. Pulling back with just enough force, the heiress spun on the spot and Yang quickly took her chance. Her hand slipped expertly down to the woman's thighs and hooked behind her knees, lifting her onto her lap in one fluid movement. Without hesitation, arms were flung around her neck and Weiss secured herself in place while letting out a small laugh. "You know," Yang purred and pressed her lips onto Weiss' collarbone, earning a small gasp of pleasure. "If we're going to waste so much time with a shower, we might as well get a little more dirty." "A little dirty?" Even a deaf person would have heard the lust in Weiss' voice. While Yang enjoyed the soft gasps and hums as a result of gently nibbling on Weiss' neck, she opened her eyes and looked towards the breakfast cart. Seeing something that would definitely be useful, she grinned to herself and wrapped an arm around the heiress' waist. Listening to her feet, she turned and dumped the girl onto the bed before reaching over and picking up the item that she had been eyeing. "Okay," she grinned as she shook the bottle of chocolate sauce, Weiss biting her bottom lip. "Maybe more than a little." Still a little put out that Weiss had forced them to leave the warmth of the hotel room. Even though what had happened before they left was more than enough of a compromise, Yang stifled a yawn as she waited for their drinks. Despite being someone who tended to be warmer than the average individual, she still hated the cold of Argus. There was something about the way it was perfectly positioned between cool and freezing that always seemed to cause her body to forget it existed, only to be sharply reminded by the feeling of ice-cold knives stabbing at her skin. It was infuriating to say the least. There were things she loved about the city though. Despite how Mistral had felt rather homey due to frequent visits when she was younger, the taller buildings, office complexes, and more standard structure definitely made her feel more comfortable. There was a familiarity there. It was also helpful that there were actually things to do such as theater, that showed movies instead of plays. However, she definitely couldn't deny that she was looking forward to getting back to Vale. Especially since she would finally be able to start fixing a few relationships. First off would definitely be Blake. Though they'd exchanged some harsh words, and hadn't talked since, Yang knew it was one that could easily be repaired. It definitely wasn't the first time they had bickered, but they usually moved past them rather quickly. After that would be her dad. A little more complex, but she had already decided she was willing to go to therapy to fix that one. It was definitely worth it, since she had already been feeling a little homesick before they even left Vale. "Yang?" The sound of her name broke her from her reverie, and she looked up to see a barista looking around the shop. "Here," she replied to the man and moved forward to collect the drinks. Giving him a nod, she accepted the drinks and took a sip of her strawberry hot chocolate. It was definitely nowhere near as good as the ones Blake made, but the delicate hint of strawberry washing over her taste buds would do in a pinch. So with a new surge of heat rushing through her, she turned to exit the coffee shop only to find herself blocked by a woman shoving a camera into her face and holding out a microphone. Hanging from her neck was a lanyard holding a card printed with the name of a local gossip magazine. Yang, the woman said with a sickening smile. Sounds Mistralian. Is that where you met Weiss? During her business trip to Mistral? Though she had tried to prepare for the inevitable, the fact that it happened so suddenly caught her off guard. Please don't be shy, the woman said, the grin still spread across her face. Our readers would love to know what your relationship is. She's my friend, a voice said from behind the woman that Yang immediately recognized as Weiss. As if knowing too, the woman spun around to face her. I'm sure that is not a friggin' concept to you. Of course not, the woman said with a bitter tone. So friends is interesting. Of the family, I assume, since she was seen meeting White Dash. We should be going, Yang. Weiss cut the woman off, reaching out to take her coffee. Oh yeah. Sidestepping the reporter, Yang followed her girlfriend to the door. Before they could reach it, however, footsteps could be heard behind them, and the woman's voice was heard again. Wait, Miss Schnee. Weiss didn't wait. Do you have any words regarding what you were doing in Mistral with the council? Yes, Weiss called back as she pushed the door open. But for a reputable news source. They left the shop without another word, but as they stepped out into the cold, Yang looked back at the reporter. She saw that the sickeningly sweet smile had turned into a sneer. Knowing that it definitely wasn't because of the insult, she was suddenly glad that she had frozen up a little. Who knows what would have been printed if she had actually said anything. Sorry, Weiss said as they turned the corner. I didn't see her until she pulled out the camera. It's fine. Yang shook her head. She just caught me off guard is all. They do that. A concerned look overcame the heiress' face as she turned to look at her. Are you sure you'll be able to handle him? Of course. Yang scoffed, immediately shaking away the discomfort she had felt and stopping on the spot. I'll go back right now and handle her. A smile quickly replaced Weiss' concern. I would rather you not. You sure? Little rough and tumble, give her the good old dash. Shut up. The girl laughed and tapped her on the arm, causing Yang to give her a goofy grin. It felt good to be able to joke with her again. So? She chuckled and continued walking, taking another sip of her drink to stave off the cold. Where are we headed? Just a nearby park. Gotcha. Will it take long? It's fucking cold today. Well, we would have been able to do this hours ago had you not made us late. Yang couldn't stop the grin that spread over her face, though she did at least make an attempt to hide it behind another sip of her coffee. Though it had started off as just a little fun, things had continued for a little longer than expected, leading to them staying in bed for another 2 hours after deciding to leave. Following that, Weiss had declared that they were late anyway, so might as well stay there for a while, though that they would definitely be leaving later to do whatever it was that the woman wanted to do. Yang wasn't exactly going to complain, since more time in bed was less time out in the cold, but even she could admit she had maybe gone a little overboard in teasing Weiss that morning. However, since Weiss had been quick to return the favor, she thought it safe to assume that Weiss also wasn't going to complain. Unfortunately though, just as Weiss had ordered, they did eventually have to leave, though the heiress had still yet to tell her what they were doing. Breakfast was good, so worth it. She smirked finally, earning a small giggle from her girlfriend. I suppose I'm inclined to agree. Weiss grinned from behind her own coffee. We are definitely getting some food before we go back to the hotel though. Yang groaned as her stomach rumbled slightly. All that chocolate sauce is sitting weird. Well, that is your own fault, but I imagine you finally know how your sister feels. Ugh. No idea how she does it. She rubbed her stomach. I need something good to eat though, and I want to cook again. Weiss hummed thoughtfully as they rounded another corner to see a park off only a few streets away. I believe there is a restaurant on 6th with one of those table grills. I can't say I've tried it though. That'll work. Yang shrugged happily, knowing most of those places were pretty good in her experience. Love me a good table grill. So many people suck at cooking meat. Hearing Weiss chuckle and give her an affectionate look, Yang was forced to keep her hand to herself by wrapping it around her cup. Not being able to act on those impulses was probably the hardest part about being so close to revealing their relationship that the news magazines already suspected something. She knew that even if she even so much as tried to wrap her arm around Weiss in what could easily be seen as friendship, then the press would take it as something else and out them before they were ready. It was definitely something she was glad wouldn't be lasting very long. Eventually though, the two of them walked through the gate to the park. The entire place was covered in snow, just like the rest of the city. It definitely wasn't enough to hide the green grass that sat below it, but the fine white powder hung from every tree and bush. The only place it didn't seem to cling to was the small jungle gym and slide in the middle of the small field, though Yang supposed that was because of two large stone structures on either side that looked to be blowing what she guessed was hot air on the equipment. As Weiss checked her phone, Yang brushed off a nearby bench and sat down, quickly followed by Weiss. Thankfully, with the bench surrounded by low bushes and shrubbery, Yang felt they were at least safe enough to reach out and place her hand over her girlfriend's. Almost immediately, the woman's eyes flicked her way, and she moved her bag to cover the tiny display of affection, though made no effort to break it. For a couple of minutes they sat there, simply exchanging small talk and discussing what they were going to be having from the restaurant when they arrived. It was actually quite nice. Even though they were still rather hidden, they were at least in the open without a disguise, and Yang very much enjoyed it. At regular intervals though, Weiss would check her scroll for the time, and eventually children and their parents began to file into the park from another entrance. With each shout of joy or caution from the new arrivals, the heiress' head would turn to look at them, only to look away again, until a man and child walked in, and her eyes settled on them. The man had to be in his late 20s, maybe even early 30s, and his bright orange hair that stuck out from under a bowler hat stood out all the way across the park. A white trench coat covered his body with dark brown slacks underneath. The little girl that had been next to him, though was now running towards the jungle gym, was tiny. Given the age of all the other children that had come from the same direction and her school uniform, Yang was pretty certain she was at least between 10 and 12, but she looked no older than 8. Her most notable feature though was her hair, bright pink on one side and dark brown on the other. "Who are they?" Yang asked, pretty sure that was who Weiss had been waiting for since her eyes had still not left the man as he leaned against the fence that connected the heaters. "That," she breathed slowly, "is Roman." "Oh." Yang instantly recognized the name as Winter's ex. "How did you find him?" "Winter said he lived in Argus last time she was in town," Weiss confessed with a weak smile. "So I may have called a private detective while you were asleep. And they found them in one day. It's a lot easier to find people who aren't hiding." The heiress chuckled. "Besides, Roman and Neo are not exactly common names here in Argus." "They are pretty valid, I guess," Yang admitted. "So what exactly do you want with him?" A low sigh escaped the snow-haired girl as she let go of her hand and stood up. "To try and fix yet another thing my father destroyed. I just hope I don't make this one worse too." Weiss' last words had been said in a hushed tone, and Yang definitely understood why. She wasn't stupid enough to think that what Winter had said was still on her girlfriend's mind, and though Yang still disagreed that it was their fault, she could at least see why Weiss would be willing to accept that their actions had played a small part. So, to try and encourage her a little, she stood to her feet and gave the girl a light punch in the arm. "You got this," she smiled warmly. "Though are you sure interfering with Winter's love life is smart? What my father did to them was wrong, and she still loves him." Weiss shrugged meekly. "Even if she chooses to ignore it, she still might not thank you." "I don't need her to," Weiss said and took a deep breath. "I just don't want her to keep running from our father." "Then I guess we should go and talk to him," Yang hummed. It took Weiss another minute to steel herself, but very quickly she took on the same aura that Yang had noticed when they had told Ilya about her parents. Though she didn't particularly feel an impersonal, business-like approach was the best option, she knew it was the thing that made Weiss the most comfortable. As such, she said nothing as they began to approach the man. Though he had made no move to acknowledge them, the way he turned away as they grew closer showed that he had definitely noticed them already. "Mr. Torchwick?" Weiss asked respectfully, stopping just short of the fence. "Sorry, kid," the man replied without looking at them. "You're looking for a different handsome gentleman. Try the next park." His reply seemed to catch Weiss off guard, and she gave a look in Yang's direction. More than happy to help her girlfriend, she leaned against the railing and put a little humor into her voice. "Weird." She grinned and took a sip of her drink. "I thought you said Winter called him charming?" "She did," Weiss hummed in agreement. "Enough charm to make a statue swoon, I believe were her exact words." His interest finally piqued, he turned to face them. Though not the type of guy she was into personally, she had to admit Winter had good taste. While only one was visible due to the same fringe the older Schnee sibling wore, the green eye that was uncovered was bright green. Black eyeliner surrounded them and only increased their brightness, but it worked well with his soft features. Won't say I haven't tried. He chuckled, dropping the pretense. Ever wondered why half the statues around here are missing underwear? I can't say I have. Yes. Weiss' eyes flicked towards her, and she gave a mischievous grin. What? I was curious. The heiress shook her head, but there was a definite smile there. I'm surprised she told you about me, though, Roman said before Weiss could make any comment about Yang perving on the statues. Thought she would have grown to regret what happened between us. She didn't tell me for a while, Weiss admitted as the man turned around to look at them properly. It was only recently she did, actually. But I know she doesn't regret it. Wes hesitated for a moment. Do you? He didn't answer, only looked Weiss up and down. For a few seconds, his eyes lingered on her before moving on, only to do the same with her hair. You look a lot like she did back then, he commented offhandedly. All uptight and serious. Though it definitely seemed like an insult, it was said with such fondness that Yang wasn't surprised at all to see Weiss' brow furrowed in confusion. Thanks, I guess. You're welcome. He grinned and looked at her amusedly, as if waiting for some kind of reaction. I like handing out the occasional compliment to beautiful women. Yang couldn't help but chuckle. Easy there, buddy, she warned jokingly. The person she's dating doesn't take well to someone hitting on her. Please, he said with a knowing look. She's all yours. Not bothering to deny it, Weiss let out a small sigh. Winter also mentioned you were infuriating to deal with. Such rave reviews. He smirked effortlessly and turned back around to look at the girl playing on the slide. So how is she? Despite his voice still being light, there was a sincerity to that question. Enough so that Weiss' frustration vanished immediately. She's good. She hesitated for a second and stepped forward to stand beside him. She's as free from our father as she can be. If you call joining the military being free, he said quietly. But at least she got away from him, I suppose. I'm guessing that means you don't regret being with her? Yang asked curiously. He shook his head. Nah. All I lost was a shitty apartment. Moving to Argus was an upgrade. He pulled his bowler hat off and spun it in his hands. Can't say I don't wish things didn't turn out differently, though. As if it was the signal she had been waiting for, a smile stretched across Weiss' lips. So why not contact her? She asked, his head turning to face her. Our father is no longer an issue, and she is still single. And I believe she still cares for you too. He shook his head and replaced the hat. If she was interested, she would have reached out already. I know she visits Argus frequently, and she paid for Neo's school uniform last year when I wasn't looking, so she definitely knows I'm here. Yup, Yang hummed sarcastically. Paying for your ex's niece's clothes. Definitely a sign that someone isn't interested. My point being, Blondie, is that she could have reached out, but she didn't. He scowled at her. She hasn't reached out because she is worried, Weiss explained. While she is no longer under our father's thumb, that doesn't mean he doesn't try to interfere with her life. By keeping you out of it, she thinks she's keeping you safe. Roman fell silent, thoughts passing across his eyes, as he watched Neo playing with the other kids. Looking over at her girlfriend, Yang raised an eyebrow to silently ask if she was sure, but received a firm nod in response. With it not being her sister, she resigned herself to not interfering and allowed Weiss to do what she thought was best. I know she's stubborn, but 6 years and she's still being stupid? He chuckled to himself, no small amount of fondness in his voice. I thought I made it clear I wasn't afraid of him. She has a tendency to think she knows what is best, and refuses to deviate from it. Yang definitely wasn't going to disagree there. But I believe she is wrong on this one. Better not say that to her face. Torchwick grinned mischievously. She doesn't take kindly to be told she's wrong. So I'm guessing you told her a lot? Yang asked. All the time, he replied cheerfully. She'd get this cute little crease on her forehead when she would try to correct me. Was always a fun afternoon. Yang chuckled at the idea of someone annoying Winter just for the fun of it. From experience, it seemed like it would end in disaster, but it sounded very much like Roman was someone who was able to press the buttons without serious consequence. Or maybe it was because he was willing to press those buttons that Winter liked him. Maybe someone who didn't back down and argued back was Winter's type. I will take your word for it, Weiss smiled. Have yo dash. Before Weiss could finish her sentence, the woman gave a small lurch backward. Looking behind them, Yang saw the small child she had seen earlier standing behind the heiress and gently tugging on the back of Weiss' jacket. Up close, Yang could see that it wasn't only the girl's hair that was multicolored, but her eyes were too. Pink and brown, the exact same shade as the hair itself. A wide smile was on her face as she looked excitedly up at Weiss, only for it to fall to a frown when the woman turned around. "Neil," Roman said quickly in a slightly sterner tone. "What have I told you about pulling?" "It's fine." Weiss shook her head and knelt down to look at the girl with a smile. "Hello, Neo. It's nice to meet you." The smile returned to Neo's face slightly, and the girl reached out to poke Weiss' ponytail, then pointed to her eyes. A little confused, the heiress looked to Roman. "Sorry, she refuses to use sign language," Roman breathed. "She's Winter's sister, Neo." At the very mention of Winter's name, the wide smile overtook Neo's face, and she gave Roman an expectant look, only for it to fall again as he shook his head. Watching it, Yang immediately felt bad for what she had said to Winter about Neo. "Don't worry," Weiss said kindly to the ice cream-haired girl. "I'll get my sister to come and see you soon, okay?" Suppressing a chuckle as Neo's head nodded so fast that Roman had to reach out and stop it, Yang watched the girl happily brush a hand through the pink side of her hair. "All right, kid," Torchwick said, and ruffled her hair a little. Go and play a little bit more. Your dentist appointment is in an hour." Giving another nod and a short wave to Weiss, the small child ran off back to the slide she was playing on. They all watched her for a second before Roman let out a sigh. You should never promise a kid something like that," she scowled at Weiss. "You said it yourself. She isn't going to reach out. Then I guess you will have to do it yourself." Weiss replied and pushed herself away from the fence. We should be going though, but I will leave you with this." Yang watched as Weiss held out her hand. A small piece of paper was trapped between her fingers, and though Roman took a second to react, he eventually reached out to take the note. As he unfolded it, Yang saw a string of numbers written on it. 2747-. "It's her number." Weiss cut him off. "You don't have to use it. But if you still care for her like I think she does you, then I really think you should call her." Stepping away from the fence without waiting for an answer, the woman nodded towards the park's exit, signaled for them to leave, and Yang followed. However, before they were even a few steps away, they heard his voice call out. "Weiss." They turned to see him pocket the note. "Thanks, I guess." The heiress smiled. "If I might make a request when you do use it, please be patient." The smirk returned to his face as he tipped his hat in her direction. Rolling her eyes, she gave the man a wave and walked away. The moment they were out of the park, she let out a low sigh. "You think he'll use it?" Yang asked. "I certainly hope so," Weiss replied and looked around them. "Now!" To Yang's surprise, Weiss slipped her arm through her own and hooked their elbows together. "Let's go and enjoy our day, because it might be the last one we have in a while." "You got it, Snowflake," Yang replied, allowing Weiss to lead them towards 6th Street. The afternoon had been pretty great, all things considered. Despite reporters eventually catching up to them, the two had in fact been able to enjoy a nice meal at the restaurant. Yang had also enjoyed having some semblance of control over how the food was cooked too, and resolved to cook them the best meal that restaurant had seen in months. And despite only having simple ingredients, she was pretty confident she had done just that. Afterwards, they had simply walked around Peridot Pavilion, exploring the few shops and stalls that surrounded it. Reporters had yet again followed them, but Yang had found them easy to ignore with Weiss at her side. However, after 2 hours of browsing the stores, Weiss buying a new tiara pin that Yang had definitely teased her for, and listening to music from a street band, the temperature had once again begun to plummet. So with their coats huddled around them and a hot drink in hand, they had made their way back to the hotel to finish packing. "Look," Yang laughed as she fiddled with her wallet in search of her keycard. "All I'm saying is that if they didn't want people to look, they wouldn't have put statues of people wearing robes so high up. I'm pretty sure they wanted people to look at them." Weiss giggled, pulling out her own instead and handing it over. "Not up them." "Same difference." Yang shrugged and swiped it through the lock. "I'll tell you though, that guy in the Peridot Pavilion? I sure as hell hope whoever made that was exaggerating, 'cause I'll help anyone he was with." She gave a gasp and turned to her girlfriend with a smirk. "Maybe that's why they called it Peridot Pavilion. You know, pages." Upon hearing Weiss giggles turn to laughter, Yang felt her heart flutter and couldn't resist wrapping an arm around her waist and pulled her into a kiss. Using her other hand, She pushed the door open and pulled them both inside before anyone could stumble across them. "Remind me?" The smaller woman grinned as the door shut, and she pulled away slightly. "Why am I attracted to someone so crass again?" "Because everyone is," she said confidently, and walked the girl backwards into the door. "But I can definitely remind you, if that's what you really want." Yang trailed a hand down Weiss' side, allowing her fingers to brush against the outside of her thigh. However, before Weiss could say anything, they heard a shuffling behind them. "I hope it's not much to ask that you both wait until after I leave," a voice said. As Yang spun around with fists raised, she saw Winter entering the room from the bedroom. The side of her face was still slightly swollen, and a prominent bruise could be seen across her jaw, but neither seemed to bother her. Though there was definitely some confusion as to how the woman had got in, Yang was quickly learning to not underestimate what the woman was capable of when she wished to do something. "Winter!" Weiss blushed, quickly straightening her hair and clothes. "What are you doing here? How did you even get in? And your face?" "Not important," the woman said dismissively. "I'm here on behalf of the Atlas Alliance Act to inform you that the Mistral police force have concluded their investigation." "Oh," Weiss replied, a tinge of disappointment in her voice. "What did they find?" "The number used to call in the threat was traced back to the daughter of someone on the list you provided. Miss Barakapil." Yang heard a small sigh escape the heiress. "She was angry you fired her father and wanted to scare you. She is currently in police custody until her father bails her out, though she is expected to face jail time." Weiss stayed silent for a moment, thoughts passing across her face. Though the name sounded familiar to Yang, she couldn't place it, but she was certain Weiss could. "I don't want to file charges," Weiss sighed eventually, stripping her jacket off and placing it on the hook. "She can go." "I'm afraid that is not your decision to make, sister." Winter shook her head. "How isn't it?" Yang interrupted. Despite their talk, Yang was still apprehensive of the woman. "She threatened Weiss, so we dash. While her threat was aimed towards my sister, her actions put every guest of that hotel in danger, cost the hotel itself money, and wasted a large amount of police resources. Her action was a felony, and she is 17, so considered an adult by Mistral law. Therefore, it is not within my sister's power to absolve her of her crime." Another sigh escaped the heiress as she sat down on the couch and rubbed her eyes. "Stupid kid," she grumbled. "It's not your fault, Weiss," Yang said, placing a reassuring hand on Weiss' shoulder. "She's the one who made that call." "I know. But she's still just a kid." "She's an adult," Winter corrected her. "And adults must face the consequences of their own actions." The sentence was ended in an offbeat tone that caused them both to look at her. After a brief pause, she let out a low sigh and continued. "Which brings me to the second reason for my visit." Yang watched the woman walk over to a nearby chair and sit down. For a minuscule moment, their eyes met, and the regret in them caused Yang to realize what was about to happen. So, not wanting to interject, she moved off to the side of the room to begin packing her clothes. "Weiss," Winter began, her tone becoming noticeably softer, "I want to apologize for my actions the other day. While I do still believe that you handled the situation regarding Father's scandal poorly, and that you should have put more thoughts into your own actions, that is no excuse for me to strike you like I did. Like I have done in the past." "You?" Weiss seemed uncertain in her reply. "You don't have to apologize for that. I know you didn't mean dash." "That's still besides the point, Weiss." Winter cut her off. "I accused you of being no better than our father, while I was the one using his method of asserting dominance over you. That was wrong, and I promise that I will do better in the future." The reply didn't come right away, and Yang felt the need to look back at the sisters only to see that Weiss had her arms wrapped around the older sibling. Despite her own feelings towards Winter, she couldn't help but smile a little since she knew what it felt like to make up with Ruby after a small falling out. "I never thought of you like him," Weiss said, almost quiet enough that Yang couldn't hear it. "But I accept your apology." "Good." There was genuine relief in Winter's voice as her arms close around Weiss too. "I would also like to try just being your sister, not a stand-in for the parents we lost years ago. I would like that very much." "Me too." Shoving the final pair of dirty socks into the side pocket of her duffel, Yang turned around and watched the sisters peacefully enjoy their embrace. After what felt like a minute though, Winter tapped the younger girl on the back, and the two separated. "I'm afraid I cannot stay longer, sister," the elder Schnee breathed, a hand raising to rest on Weiss' cheek for a second before dropping to her side. But I am needed in Atlas. I understand. Weiss nodded, swiping at her eyes. Do you know when you will be in Vale next? Not for a while, I assume, but I will make sure to keep you informed. She smiled warmly, causing her usually cold eyes to twinkle. Take care, sister. You too. After exchanging another smile with each other, Winter stepped away and began to make her way to the door. However, before she pulled it open, the older woman looked back at Yang. I'm happy you two made amends. Thanks. With a final nod of acknowledgement, Winter pulled the door open and left the room. Returning to shoving a t-shirt into her duffel, she quickly felt Weiss press up against her back, hands snaking around her waist in a tight hug. That, she breathed constantly, is a perfect reminder of why I love you.
And that's all for today. Thanks for coming by and hanging out. I hope to see you next time.